Hey, what's up everyone, Johnny the Geek here, and welcome to the parts list of the H81 budget build. This is a complete guide with the build and Windows installation process. This system is for those who don't have a whole lot of money to spend and would be something I consider to be the bare minimum for most users out there. So let's see what we got here. Starting with the motherboard, I went with the MSI H81M-P33. This is using the H81 chipset from Intel. There is only 2 RAM slots, which is plenty fine for the amount that I'm using for this system. There's one full PCI Express slot for a GPU and one PCI Express slot for an add-in card like a Wi-Fi, sound, or capture card. There are 4 SATA 6G ports and 2 USB header pins. The input and output is your standard set of PS2 connections, 4 USB 2.0 ports, 2 USB 3.0 ports. There's a DVI and VGA port for video, gigabit Ethernet, and some standard audio ports. The CPU is a very popular Intel G3258 dual-core processor with an unlocked multiplier that's capable of overclocking on this system. It's going to be cooled by this 120mm aftermarket cooler called the Pure Rock from Be Quiet. Powering the system is this EVGA 430-watt power supply. The RAM is 8 gigs of Samsung value-oriented memory with some heat spreaders added to it. The heat spreaders were a few dollars on eBay, and it's there mainly for looks. The main boot drive of the system is a 120 gig SSD from Silicon Power that has a 5-year warranty. For additional storage, I included a 1TB Seagate hard drive. The graphics card is a popular 750 Ti from Gigabyte. Stock or reference 750 Ti's don't usually need any additional power plugs, but this card is overclocked out of the box and has some large cooling pipes on it to keep it cool. It has 2 HDMI 1.4a ports and 2 DVI ports. The case is a Fractal Design Core 1000. It has a full front mesh that is great for cooling. The front panel input and outputs are actually on the side of the case with power and reset. There is also a USB 2.0 and 3.0 port with the audio ports as well. That's it for the parts list. Stay tuned for the build guide coming up next. Starting with the motherboard, use the box as a surface to work on. And be sure to remove any static by touching the case often or by wearing an anti-static wrist strap. The first component we will install is the CPU. Remove the CPU socket cover and lift the retention arm to open the latch. Notice the arrow on the bottom left corner and the 2 indentations on the CPU. It will line up with the arrow and the notches on the socket. Carefully place the CPU in the socket and then lower the retention arm. There's a little bit of force needed to lock it into place. Open the tabs on the RAM slots and line up the notches with the indentations on the RAM. Press firmly straight down until the tabs snap back into place. Prepping the CPU cooler requires the 4 backplate screws to be held into place by 4 rubber O-rings. I happen to lose one of them, so that's why you're only seeing 3. Attach the bracket to the back of the motherboard so that the screw goes through the 4 holes of the motherboard. Then attach the 4 nuts onto the backplate screws, and after that, screw down the 2 mounting brackets. Take a look at the CPU cooler and remove the cover off the block. This cooler comes with pre-applied thermal compound. Position it in a way you choose to have your fans directing the airflow. I chose the typical front to back position. Insert the cooler mounting bridge and screw it down. There's an included wrench that I recommend you to use, and you might have to remove the RAM in order to get one of the sides. Now attach the fan onto the CPU cooler and plug in the power. Prep the case by installing the input-output shield. Press firmly to lock it into place. Install the power supply with the fan facing down and screw in the 4 screws that came with your PSU. Before installing the motherboard, plug in the 4-pin CPU power connector. This will make it easier because there will not be any room in the case to plug it in later. Now lower the motherboard into the case and line up the holes with the standoffs that were already installed into the case. Screw in the motherboard with these screws that came with the case. Make sure you screw in all the standoffs that the motherboard uses. Now plug in the 24-pin ATX power connector. Use these supplied long screws that go through the rubber rings to install the hard drive. Remove 2 of the rubber rings and use these screws to install the SSD. Plug in the SATA cables to the drives and the motherboard. They are slotted in such a way that it would only fit one way, so don't worry about which way you have to plug them in. Now plug in the front panel connector and the front panel USB connector onto the header pins on the motherboard. Take a look at the connector and you will see that one of the holes are plugged. This is to line up with a missing pin on the header. Refer to the manual for the instructions on which panel connector needs to be plugged into the header pins on the motherboard. This is for things like the power button, hard drive LED, and power LED. Remove 2 of the expansion slot covers on the case to install the graphics card. Line up the card with the slot and press down until the tab in the slot clicks and locks the card into place. This is similar to installing the RAM. Screw the card's bracket into the case and plug in the 6-pin power connector. Plug in the bare essentials such as the power, video, Ethernet, keyboard, and mouse. I happen to be using a wireless keyboard and mouse combo, which is why you just see a USB dongle being plugged in. I recommend using the USB 2.0 ports to start because it's more compatible. Now give it a test start and make sure there are no cables obstructing the fans that should all be spinning. Congratulations, you finished building a computer. Practice some better cable management than I just did and install the operating system, which by the way I have a video on and it's coming up next. Let's start by configuring some basic settings in the BIOS. Press the delete key to get into the BIOS screen. The first step is to load the default settings. Next is to update the date and time. This is important to access the internet later on and download Windows updates. In the advanced settings and integrated peripherals, make sure that the SATA mode is set to AHCI mode. Most likely it's already set that way. Then make sure the PCI Express graphics is the initial graphics adapter if you have a discrete graphics card. Otherwise, you would change it to IGD or Integrated Graphics Display. In the boot order options menu, change option number 1 to your main boot drive. In my case, it is already the SSD installed. But let's say for example the SSD was not one of the options, because the hard drive priorities might have another drive selected. So this is where I'm showing you how to select between the two. That's it for the basic settings. Now save and reboot the machine. By now you should have inserted the USB Windows installation flash drive, and if you don't have one, I have a link in the video on how to make one. The link is in the description. When you see the logo, press the F11 key to bring up the boot menu. Select the USB flash drive and boot the Windows installation. This is the Windows pre-installation environment. After choosing a language, click on Install Now, then accept a license agreement. Choose the Custom Install Windows Only type and you will be presented with your blank hard drives. If your drives does not look like this, and you're not sure which drive to format, then I suggest turning off the system and unplugging all the drives except your main boot drive. In this example, both drives are completely wiped, and the SSD is 112 gig option listed here. After selecting the drive and clicking on New, allocate the maximum amount of space and click on Apply. You will see that a few partitions have been made and the primary partition is already selected for you. Do not click on any of the other partitions and click on Next. Now the installation process will begin. This could take up to 20 to 30 minutes, and the system will reboot a few times until the Windows setup process. Now follow the on-screen instructions to complete the setup process. Once you're on the desktop, the first thing I like to do is right-click on the desktop and add some familiar icons. Choose any one you like. I previously downloaded the drivers from the manufacturer's website for the motherboard and unzipped them onto the Windows installation thumb drive. Some of these files needed to be unzipped further before being able to run the setup file. It's best to install the chipset drivers first, and after that you can install the rest of the drivers such as audio, Ethernet, and Intel graphics. This system has a wireless USB device to get access to the internet instead of using the Ethernet cable. That's because a cable was not available to be plugged into the computer at the time. Once the drivers for the Wi-Fi is installed and connected to the internet, download and install the discrete graphics card drivers from NVIDIA. While the graphics drivers are installing, change the power options to high performance and disable the screen from turning off. This is just temporary for the setup process. You can make your own power option settings later. Once the drivers are finished installing, you will notice a better resolution that has been automatically chosen for your monitor. Now search for Windows Update and click on the icon to search for the latest Windows Update from Microsoft. It is important that the time displayed on the bottom right corner of the taskbar is accurate. Checking for updates could take a long time, and once the first round of updates are done, the system will reboot. But wait, there's more. Yes, that's right, the updates are not finished, and you need to keep checking for them until it says that there are no more updates. Yay, no more updates. Now do a final check of the device manager by right-clicking on this PC icon and choosing Properties. This is to make sure that all the drivers are installed on your hardware is working with Windows properly. Last but not least, open a web browser and navigate to a website called ninite.com. Choose the free programs you would like to use on your system. The programs I've selected here are just my own personal preferences. After the installation, start each of the programs to make sure that they are working. So that's it for this complete system build guide. I hope you found that to be useful for you. Be sure to subscribe for more content like this, and as always, thanks for watching.